Hello friends, imagine a country drowning in poverty and unemployment. A place where crime is rampant, drugs destroy lives, riots break out on the streets, and people are caught in the grips of illiteracy and hopelessness. Now imagine that this same country transforms into one of the richest, cleanest, and safest nations on Earth within a single generation. Sounds like a fantasy, right? But this isn't fiction. This is the real story of Singapore, a nation that went from chaos to becoming Asia's #1 country. In 1965, Singapore was struggling to survive. It was a small island with no natural resources, no army, and barely any industry. Poverty was everywhere, unemployment was high, and drugs had taken over the streets. Yet in just 25 years, it rose like a phoenix from the ashes. Today, Singapore ranks among the world's top 5 richest countries. It is known for its spotless streets, almost zero corruption, and one of the highest living standards on the planet. How did this miracle happen? Who made it possible? Let's dive deep into the extraordinary story of Singapore's rebirth. Singapore is so small that it's difficult to find it on a world map. Nestled between Malaysia and Indonesia, this island covers just about 710 square kilometers, barely half the size of Delhi, but is home to almost 6 million people. Its population density is nearly 18 times that of India, making it one of the most crowded nations in the world. The name Singapore itself comes from Sanskrit, Sing meaning lion and Pur meaning city, the Lion City. Today, Singapore is a symbol of diversity and unity. People from every major religion live peacefully here: Buddhists, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, and Taoists, along with smaller groups of Jews, Jains, Sikhs, and others. Nearly a fifth of the population identifies as non-religious. Ethnically too, Singapore is a melting pot. About 3/4 are of Chinese descent, followed by Malays, Indians, and smaller Eurasian communities. Yet this harmony wasn't always the case. For centuries, the island was merely a trading post, passed from one colonial power to another. In 1819, British officer Thomas Raffles bought Singapore from the Sultan of Johor and turned it into a free port. Ships from all over Asia began docking here, fueling a booming trade in tin and rubber. But alongside trade came something darker: opium. The British cultivated opium in Bengal and processed it in Singapore, employing thousands of Chinese workers who soon became addicts. By the 1940s, Singapore was plagued by addiction, crime, and corruption. Then came World War II, and with it, devastation. The Japanese invaded Singapore in 1942, bringing with them unimaginable horrors: massacres, torture, forced labor, and exploitation. When the war ended in 1945, the island was in ruins, buildings destroyed, thousands homeless, and the economy shattered. Food was scarce, disease was everywhere, and crime ruled the streets. The British briefly returned to power, but the winds of change were blowing. In 1959, Singapore held full elections for the first time, and a young, determined leader named Lee Kuan Yew emerged as prime minister. He led the People's Action Party, the PAP, and believed Singapore's survival depended on uniting with Malaysia. But this union quickly soured. Discrimination against Chinese Singaporeans and economic disagreements led to racial riots and deep mistrust. Finally, in 1965, Singapore was expelled from Malaysia and became an independent republic. It was a heartbreaking moment. The tiny new nation had no natural resources, no army, and few allies. Even the British, who had provided jobs and defense, announced they would withdraw their forces by 1971. Lee Kuan Yew was devastated. He even wept on television after the separation, but he refused to give up. He knew that if Singapore was to survive, it would have to reinvent itself from scratch, and that's exactly what he did. He started by securing peace with neighboring countries and co-founding ASEAN, an alliance for regional cooperation. Then he introduced national service, making it compulsory for every young man to serve in the military or public service, building a strong defense from within. But Lee knew that true power didn't come from weapons, it came from education. He transformed the education system, making primary schooling compulsory and affordable. Vocational training was introduced so that citizens learned real-world, practical skills. He wanted every Singaporean, no matter how poor, to have the tools to rise. He also understood that unity was non-negotiable. Singapore had to be secular, not Chinese, Malay, or Indian, but Singaporean. He created an ethnic integration policy ensuring that people of all races lived together in public housing, preventing segregation and nurturing understanding. Children were taught about harmony and respect from the very beginning, even celebrating Racial Harmony Day every July, dressing in each other's traditional clothes to learn empathy and equality. Halfway through this incredible journey, if you're still with me, hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this deserve to be heard. And if you want to know how one man's leadership changed an entire nation, you won't want to miss what comes next. Lee Kuan Yew believed that cleanliness was the foundation of civilization. In 1968, he launched the Keep Singapore Clean campaign, a national movement that went far beyond slogans. Public waste collection was organized, recycling bins were placed across the city, and public toilets were built and maintained to perfection. Laws were introduced to fine anyone for littering, spitting, or smoking in public, and yes, even chewing gum was banned in 1992. Singapore was determined to become the cleanest city in Asia, and it succeeded. Next, Lee tackled the slums. Families living in shacks were relocated to modern public housing with running water, electricity, and sanitation. Over time, more than 80% of Singaporeans came to live in government-built homes, one of the highest rates in the world. Homelessness was nearly wiped out. Street hawkers and small traders were organized into clean, well-planned food centers. Pig and duck farms near the rivers were moved, industries were relocated, and the city transformed into a model of urban planning and greenery. Healthcare became accessible and efficient. With government hospitals and smart insurance schemes like MediSave and MediShield, Singapore built a healthcare system that was affordable yet world-class. At the same time, the government discouraged private car ownership to save space and reduce pollution. Cars were taxed heavily while public transport was made cheap, clean, and convenient. But how did the government pay for all this? Surprisingly, Singapore's income tax rates remained low, much lower than most Western countries. The secret lay in smart fiscal management. The government owned companies like Temasek Holdings, which invested in profitable global businesses. These government-run enterprises generated massive revenue, ensuring that the country always maintained a fiscal surplus. Every Singaporean also contributed a part of their salary to a national savings scheme called the Central Provident Fund, building one of the highest savings rates in the world. Since the island had no natural resources, Lee Kuan Yew focused on building infrastructure, ports, airports, and industrial hubs, and attracting foreign investment. Bureaucracy was cut down, corruption was crushed, and doing business became simple and transparent. Today, Singapore ranks among the easiest places in the world to do business. Corruption, the curse of many developing nations, was eliminated with ruthless efficiency. Government salaries were raised to reduce temptation, performance was rewarded, and the law came down hard on offenders. Singapore's Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau was made independent, able to even investigate ministers without interference. Over time, Singapore became the least corrupt country in Asia and one of the cleanest governments on the planet. Lee also had a deep respect for the environment. Tree Planting Day was launched, and within a decade, the number of trees matched the number of people. Rivers were cleaned, parks were built, and nature became part of city life. Today, Singapore's lush greenery isn't just a policy, it is part of its identity. To build the economy further, Singapore encouraged industries like petrochemicals, semiconductors, biotechnology, and aerospace engineering. But Lee didn't want Singapore to be just another cheap labor hub. He wanted skilled, educated workers. Employers were required to pay into a skills development fund, ensuring that every worker could upgrade their skills and stay globally competitive. By the 1990s, Singapore had transformed from a struggling port city to a global technology and innovation hub. And perhaps the most remarkable part of this story, Lee Kuan Yew never built statues or monuments for himself. There are no temples in his honor, no busts or portraits demanding worship. When he passed away in 2015, his son, the current prime minister, said that his father never wanted a cult of personality. His greatest legacy was Singapore itself. Some call him a benevolent dictator because he maintained strict control and limited press freedom. But unlike most leaders who misuse power, Lee Kuan Yew used his authority to build, not to dominate. He held himself accountable, listened to others, and worked tirelessly to make sure Singapore would stand long after him. From slums to skyscrapers, from chaos to calm, from despair to dignity, Singapore's journey proves that even the smallest nation can achieve greatness with vision, discipline, and unity. And maybe that's the real magic. That one man's dream could lift an entire country. What do you think, my friends? Can the principles that built Singapore work in other nations too? Could your country ever follow this path? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I'd love to read what you think. And if you found this story inspiring, share it with someone who believes change is impossible, because Singapore proved that it isn't.